Hello and welcome to the True Myth Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Nedesheim, and I have a very special guest with me today because all my guests are special, but this one is special. His name is Mitch Roush. Say hi to the
Woo!
nice people there, Mitch.
Hello. I hope all of you listening are nice people. If not, then this would be really awkward.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose you could say hi to the not nice people as well, but you know.
Oh, greetings to the not nicers as well.
And all of you in between. Mitch is a creative enthusiast, writer, marketing director, and professional communicator. Mitch has a passion for people, their dreams, and empowering them to share their stories. Mitch serves as the marketing director for Northwest Mutual and theater director at a community playhouse. He's also co-owner of Make Local Creative Group, co-host of the successful Starving Critics podcast, freelance content craftsman, and a published playwright. Mitch is a 2010 graduate of York College with a double BA in theater and communications with a minor in theology. His education, internships, and professional career have taken him to China, Ecuador, and Norway. Roush is currently pursuing an MA in theater from Regents University. Mitchell and his wife Marissa and daughter Sophia live in the heartland of Nebraska. Thanks for being on with us, Mitch.
Thanks for making time for me. Hopefully, it'll be worthwhile to your lovely audience.
So, theater is the theme of this particular one, and just kind of sussing out the different ways that faith interacts with theater, or maybe it's even not as complicated as finding one way, but maybe it is steeped in the thing itself. I've followed some of Mitch's work and have loved what I saw, and thought he would be a great addition to this series. So I guess first question is there something special or unique to theater that you really can't get in other mediums, or maybe at least not receive as well, either from an audience standpoint or a creative individual standpoint?
Oh yeah, totally. Loaded question right out of the gate. So we're gonna I'm gonna try hard not to go super nerdy for everybody. But obviously I have a rich love and a rich history for theater in my life.
Mhm.
So that's kind of a big deal. Here's the thing that I think is key to understanding theater, and I guess how we got here is theater has always been, or theater, let's just say performance, story of performing story, because that's what theater is, performing a story.
Sure.
Say performing a story has been around for as long as humans have been around,
Hmm.
and it's been a key component to not only preserving history and providing entertainment, but also allowing people and society to continue to analyze themselves in the current state of which they rest. So
Sure.
obviously there are a lot of different artistic mediums that can carry a lot of different profundity components, but I feel like theater is the longest lasting and will be the most surviving. And one could argue that theater is living history performed right in front of you. It's something that you could take
Mm.
something that was written a long time ago and still breathe new life into it, and bring a vivid image of it to a current day audience. Excuse me. There's just a lot of potential there and a lot of rich history at the same time. So I would say the big thing about theater is, um, out of all the different artistic mediums that one can experience firsthand, theater is arguably the one where you experience the most firsthand energy and community type experience, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, there's no barrier, when you're watching a movie, there's the barrier of the screen. With a
yeah.
theater, you're breathing the same air as the actors, essentially.
It's an organic thing. And when you go and experience theater, it's like going to see the ocean. You never see the same ocean twice. You're standing on the shore,
Mm.
water comes up on the shore, and then it goes back, and it's a different ocean than what you saw before, because not all of the water components and all of the sand components go back to where they were. Theater
Hmm.
is the exact same way. You're experiencing an organic thing. And I think energy and emotion are the most contagious things that we humans have access to. And
Sure.
theater is about creating a specific organic emotional experience that is shared among a group of people and is completely exclusive to that room of people, both the performers and those consuming it in that room. And it cannot be reproduced, but it connects those people for the rest of forever.
It seems to me that people do not have, like, if I were to ask an average person on the streets, what is theater? Or, what is special about theater? They would not give back that answer. And but no, I'm saying it's good that you have. And I'm curious why there seems to be maybe it's just my area, I don't know, but it seems like there's a disconnect between the common man and theater. Like everybody goes to movies, but not everybody goes to plays.
Massive disconnect right now. Theater history has never seen a disconnect to the likes of this before.
Do you think it's because of the different types of media that are available, like YouTube and Netflix and things that require less of you to participate in? You don't have to get dressed and go out and go to a play, or what do you think the disconnect is?
I think that's a huge part of it, and that's the surface level part of it. That's certainly at least contributing 50% to what I perceive as this disconnect here, and that's the easiest one to pick apart. Is this concept of, okay, we just have so many other things available to us, and it's readily available at our literal fingertips. That makes a massive difference. I think the other big disconnect is this mixture of Western theater is kind of going through this period of what I call stagnation, of where we're starving for some new innovative approaches that's beyond just realism, and we can talk about that a little bit later if you want. And
Sure.
The other aspect of it too is the role of theater in society has been slowly diminished over the last century. At the risk of going a little bit too nerdy for people, if you want to talk about theater's history is so important because theater was not only the key component to educating audiences about what was going on, it was also key to highlight the power of storytelling and communication. And it was also a key component in fueling the way a society or a group of people would approach whether they respected or they needed to revolt against their particular government. Theater was at the centerfold of church in the Renaissance and the Middle Ages. Theater was at the center of entertainment for all kinds of festivals for any sort of century. Theater was at the heart of storytelling for any sort of century. And I don't think, especially since probably maybe the 40s and 50s, the 1940s and 1950s, especially in Europe and America, the United States, theater has become less about how can we connect a community with stories and more about a pure entertainment medium. And if it's being viewed as a pure entertainment medium, especially as it continues to embrace mostly just realism, then it becomes more of this high society type option where it's like, oh, that's sort of something that rich white people do. And more of the normal common man, for lack of a better term, can just enjoy what they need and what they want at the hands of going to music concerts at a bar, movies, or watching their Netflix. I don't know if all that makes sense. I kind of said a lot right there.
Yes, please say a lot, and please do not fear being nerdy on this podcast.
Wave the nerd flags, everybody.
Yes, please do. How do you bridge that gap? I mean, do you consider even television shows and Netflix shows a type of theater that is more accessible, or is it more a perversion of the purity? Because I mean, I know you like movies. You have a podcast where you talk about your love and sometimes hatred of movies.
Closely intertwined.
Do you think that's a version of theater, or does it take people further away?
Wow. Okay, that's a good question. I would counter that, Adam, by saying not necessarily a form of theater, but giving us a window into the potential that theater still holds to grow and more influence that it could grasp, because I think cinema is still wildly popular. You can look at box office numbers of the favorite movies of the year, and it's still, cinema's doing just fine. And Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu, those are not only at all-time highs for subscribers, but also I would argue that Netflix and Amazon and Hulu are producing probably 85 to 90% of the best original television content available to the consumer now. So clearly TV is at an all-time high as well, as far as the amount of stuff and the different ways it can come to us. So I would say this illustrates what we've always known about humanity, which is humans are moved by story. Whether it's just for pure escapism or whether it's for a profound experience or somewhere in between, people are moved by story. Well, you know what? Theater, it doesn't get more grassroots theater and narrative and exploration of emotion than the theater. I think what we need to do is we need to address more of, okay, Broadway has become this expensive experience to invest in. The West End theatrical experience in London is an expensive investment. These sorts of things. And there are a lot of community theaters and smaller communities that either don't have the ability to tap into diversity like they need to for both the types of theater that they could be doing and the racial and socioeconomic diversity they should be exploring. And a lot of small community theater has grown stale for the sake of just reproducing fluffy old classics or shallow comedies. And so between the disconnect of viewing Broadway as this massive, expensive thing, and then a lot of local theater experiences being low quality, there just may not be as high of an esteem for it because we haven't seen the full potential it can carry.
Sure. Do you think that there's some sort of necessity? I mean, do you think that the rehashing the old classics or going for kind of the more base interests, do you think that's a reaction by the theater community to, like, they see the numbers dropping and they're like, man, we got to get people in here. What's going to get them in here? Let's, do that one, Dumb and Dumber live on Broadway or whatever.
Which I would probably pay money to go see. Whether it's bad or whether it's good, I've got to see it.
If Lin-Manuel Miranda did it, then, that might be something.
If Lin-Manuel did it, he would make everybody Latino and it would be glorious.
The symphony here in Denver will sometimes do video game score. That's cool. As their thing. And it's really interesting. I went to one where they did Looney Tunes.
Oh my gosh.
Where they played it up on the screen and then they had the live orchestra. And yet I wonder if that's their way to try to bring people in. And hopefully if you liked the Looney Tune thing, then maybe you'll like our series on Bach next week.
Well, see, I think that's a great innovative approach to infuse different types of media together. I mean, there's this has been kind of a traveling thing that has taken shape in some bigger cities around the country as well, where you can go into a concert hall and see a live symphony perform all the music for the Lord of the Rings movies while you watch the LOTR on the big screen.
Yes,
those are really cool. I know, right? Nerd flag, let's do it. Those are kind of multi-immersive sensory exploration type experiences that I think are healthy. There's something to be said about the notoriety of something that is familiar in name. I get that.
Sure.
And that is part of it. But I really think there needs to be more of an exploration of how can we repackage it. It's a feeble attempt to just say we're going to do something familiar and do it the way it's always done and hope that people come because it's kind of familiar. I think there's a way to repackage it, either both drastically or even subtly, to do something slightly different. A couple of examples for you. Last year, I directed for Agatha Christie's 150th birthday. In our community, they commissioned for me to direct The Mousetrap, which is the longest running play in the history of theater. It's actually still going strong after 60-something years in London, plays 8 times a week. But I wanted to do something slightly different with it. Obviously, we wanted to celebrate the history of it, but it's still realism and it takes place in a stationary room. So I thought, what can I do to do something slightly different that would give my community a different window into this show, but still celebrates the history? So what I did is I pushed everything into present day. I pushed it into 2016. Spoiler alert, if you're not familiar with the oldest play that's been running in the world, Mousetrap, the inspector of the murder is actually the murderer. That's the big reveal at the end. But what I did was, obviously this play was designed to take place in like the 40s or 50s, right? I put it in 2016 with the feminist movement alive and well. And so not only did I update the set to make it look very vivid and very modern, and then had very drab and symbolic modern clothing as well, very stripped down on the clothing instead of being overly ornate like you would see. I had an overly ornate but very inherently modern set, stripped down basic clothing with solid colors, and then I made the inspector / murderer a female. I thought that brought a great sense of refreshing new life to the narrative without compromising the artistic integrity, and it was a new approach that no one had ever seen, at least in my particular context.
Sure.
So another more extreme example would be if you guys have the Googles handy, I would Google the theater director Ivan Van Hove. He is one of my favorite theatrical directors, and this dude is visceral. He is known for, he's award-winning. He won the Tony Award this last year for his interpretation of A View from the Bridge, which I actually saw on Broadway, and it was one of the most phenomenal things I've ever seen. But basically what he does is he takes classics or even modern classics and he transforms them into a completely different world while still keeping the original narrative. So A View from the Bridge is an Arthur Miller story that takes place during the 40s. and it's about a working class family and dealing with immigration. Well, he decided, instead of taking the realism approach, he did it Greek tragedy style, and he built a small stage that almost looked like a little boxing ring, and built it on the middle of the stage, and then thrust the stage. So then there were audience members sitting out in the normal audience and also on the stage watching everything up front, and staged it Greek tragedy style. And in the end, the main character gets into this big fight with the immigrant dating his niece, and the main character dies at the hands of this fight. Well, the big climax for this Greek tragedy style was to take everybody that was involved in this conflict, and they put some operatic music on, and they moved choreographically and rhythmically, and got into this big physical huddle, and were moving rhythmically with the music, and you could tell that they were struggling. And then this big rain of blood water came pouring down above them from the ceiling and drenched them all. And it was this massive symbol and a beautiful way to breathe new life into an Arthur Miller work. Another thing that he did on Broadway, same season with different people, Saoirse Ronan, and what starred in this, as well as what's his face, the guy from Cloud Atlas, Ben Whishaw. They did The Crucible, and he restaged the whole thing to take place in an old private Catholic school. And Saoirse, playing Abigail, was like a 14-year-old Catholic schoolgirl, and John Proctor was the headmaster of the school, and it made it look like he was a pedophile. And that was a brilliant way to breathe new life to this story, rather than just saying, I'm going to keep it during the time period of the Salem witch trials. So I would say that's a very long answer of saying there's a lot of room for reviving the old classics to get some name recognition, to put more butts in seats. But there's a lot of creativity to be had, I think, into reframing the way we approach that work while still keeping the artistic integrity of when it was originally crafted. And that might be a more exciting and more memorable experience for the audience.
Sure. Do you think there's a danger in some of the revivals where the more they rework certain things for a modern context, the further they get away from the original intent of the author?
Always a danger. I would say if they ever start messing with the language or rewriting it at all, you're in trouble. Especially when it comes with Shakespeare. I mean, if you want to talk about somebody that gets repackaged and resurfaced all the time, there's literally horrible examples and life-changing examples and everywhere in between with Shakespeare. So like, take the movie 10 Things I Hate About You, the popular teen comedy from the 90s, right? That was loosely based on The Taming of the Shrew. Right. Whether it's a good movie or not, does it preserve the artistic integrity of Shakespeare? Probably not, but it's an example of that. Or you could take...
I'll just pretend that movie wasn't really important for me in high school.
Yeah, right. Let's just do that. Let's just pretend that all of us didn't see it 4 or 5 times. And
exactly. It's a safe space.
There are lots of examples of that. You can take, probably most people that have seen Shakespeare live has probably seen Shakespeare done in taking place in a time period other than when it was originally set. That's a very common thing. I'm saying, let's do that for everything. I mean, we can do it with Arthur Miller. We can do it with Tennessee Williams. We can do it with, Christopher Marlowe. We can do it. We have all of these different sorts of options. And I just think exploring new avenues of creativity is what Western theater needs. I'm going to take us on a quick little bird walk here, but I think this fuses both the idea of exploring more creativity and fuses together aspects of faith in theater for you, Adam. Have you seen the musical The Lion King, the live one?
I've not seen it. I've just seen little clips online, but I've not seen it myself.
That's fair. So the Broadway musical of The Lion King is one of the top 5 longest running in history. It has been touring ever since it was initially put on Broadway. It's one of the most popular ones, obviously, because it's family friendly. And it was directed by Julie Taymor, who I consider to be one of the finest theatrical minds in history. What's interesting is I remember seeing Lion King by the original company in Minnesota before they went to Broadway. It's one of the most vivid experiences I've ever had in my life. The thing that I commonly hear from people who I would say are theater novices or just general common man theater goers, people who aren't as nerdy about it as I am, would say, yeah, I've seen The Lion King and it was unreal. I've never seen anything like it. That was so inventive. Well, here's the actual irony of the whole situation. The only thing inventive about Julie Taymor's approach was her taking that approach and bringing it to America. In fact, most of what fueled her costume design, her lighting, the backdrops, the production quality, the way she told the narrative in almost every piece of that musical, the way that was fueled was actually from some of the oldest forms of ancient theater the world has ever known. The only problem is, for us Westerners used to modern realism, we didn't know that because most of what we see on stage in the musical version of Lion King comes from ancient religious ritualistic theater from Indonesia and Bali. That stuff was born as early as before the Bible times, and a lot of those things are still going on today. But we don't learn that in our theater programs here, or our artistic programs, or our liberal arts programs here stateside, or even in Europe. We don't learn about those things. We just learn mainly about the Western culture of performance, and a lot of that has just focused on realism. And so we watch something like Lion King, we're completely captivated by the beauty, the new approach, the ritualistic style, the puppetry, the amazing tapestry that Julie Taymor has woven together. And then you dive deeper into history and you realize, holy crap, this stuff has been around for forever. Why have I never seen this before?
Sure.
And so something like The Lion King is a salute to fusing religious philosophy into art, and also celebrating the history that we have and repackaging it into something that's much more popular and modern today, on top of the fact that basically the story of Lion King is just, a more family-friendly version of Hamlet. So it's like you've got Shakespeare with Disney, with ancient religious ritualistic theater from Bali and Indonesia, all mixed and matched into a Broadway musical in New York, and you just get this amazing thing. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I'm sure it did. I'm just sitting here listening. So what, you talked about some classics, you talked about some contemporary stuff. What kind of what classics are you drawn to personally?
That's a really good question. Now, I personally interpret the term classics within theater a little bit differently. I think the term classics is a pretty wide range for me, and I identify it as a piece of theater or literature that is commonly known, in title at least, by most common people, not necessarily from a specific time period. So like,
you would put like Wicked in that category?
I would put Wicked as a modern classic. Definitely. There's a sense of modern. I like to separate, when I think of modern, I think more of like what's taken place from like the 70s to current day. Anything prior to that has potential to be a classic if it's well known. So I would say like classics on my list would vary. Like William Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice is, I think, Shakespeare's finest work in my personal opinion. That's a classic. But then like Henrik Ibsen, his classic A Doll's House, and even his lesser known work Ghosts, I would consider those both classics just because Henrik Ibsen is like the father of modern theater in Europe. And he's also from Norway, and I've got a soft spot in my heart for the Norway. Tennessee Williams' The Glass Menagerie, that is easily considered a classic in theatrical realms. It's both semi-autobiographical for him, and it's one of the most profound and influential plays of the early to mid 20th century. And then even works by like Eugene Ionesco and Edward Albee would be considered classics, some of the more known stuff, because that's from the theater of the absurd realm. And I'm a big absurdist nut. And so something like The Zoo Story or The Chairs, I would consider those classics as well, because they're usually key components when you're studying theater history.
Is there anything from the classics that you would recommend to somebody who's maybe not that steeped in theater, but is interested in finding those plays that either intentionally or unintentionally have something to say that informs faith?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Maybe an overly cliche example, but one that's obviously stood the test of time, it's really, really old, would be Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. That one is, most people usually read that in high school if they're going to read it at all, but it's very emotionally charged. And it's all about this concept of predestination, preordained, and it talks so much about the lineage of the gods in the ancient Greek time period. So I think that lays an awful large foundation in that conversation. Well, I mean, obviously Shakespeare plays a lot with this, like the line from Hamlet where we have, "There are more things in heaven and on earth, dear Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." That's just so weighty. And Hamlet has this concept of there has been a wrongful death, and the ghost of the wrongful death comes back to tell his son, "You need to write this, not just because the situation is bad on earth, but because I want to be laid to rest."
Right.
That is huge. And The Tempest.
And Hamlet uses a play. Hamlet uses a play to, well, the play is the thing to get the conscience of the king.
In which I will capture the conscience of the king.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then even The Tempest is this concept of, are we living in this world of supernatural? We examine where it is we come from and what powers do we have. And it deals with this very, very heavy theme of, can we find redemption? Everything about the Tempest is this concept of, I need this indulgence. Let your indulgence be, and I shall be pardoned be. This thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine. We are such stuff as dreams are made of. All of this is found in the Tempest. So that's another really great one.
Isn't that one, and please do not think me smart if this is right, think me stupid if it's dumb, but my only knowledge of this comes from the episode of Star Trek where Picard is having Data go through the monologue of the sorcerer in the Tempest. Isn't one of the themes of the Tempest with the sorcerer like the seeming need to lay down superstitions and religions of the past because we're moving along technologically and we no longer need those spiritual things, and the sorcerer feels out of place?
Yes, that's a big part of the conversation there. Totally. Yeah, I think you're right on the money. And, Star Trek.
Star Trek was right on the money. Yeah.
Those are some of the more stereotypical ones. Arthur Miller's The Crucible is a more modern one. I mean, I think that came out in the 60s, and that one is obviously that's both, where like Arthur Miller wrote that as a symbolic commentary because he was under scrutiny from Senator McCarthy about being a supposed communist. Obviously, he was not, and he was upset about it. So he decided to write The Crucible, which is a story about the Salem witch trials and all about people being wrongly accused. I've actually had the opportunity to play John Proctor in that role, and it is a massively profound experience. But that whole thing is about this concept of, we believe in a black and white formulaic religion. Thus, if A plus B equals C, then that means we have to do this. And what The Crucible does is it is a tragic look at the hard ways we find out that there's more gray than black and white in the faith, and that it's not necessarily a question of whether God exists or not. It's a question of, are we going to be serious about our faith, or are we going to be serious about rule following?
Well, and even John Proctor at the end, though, correct me if I have this wrong, but they're trying to force him to sign the confession or whatever, and he says, I can't put my name to this.
Yep.
He has to.
So what happens is, John Proctor's a flawed man. He has an affair with a younger woman in the community. He confesses it to his wife. His wife stays with him, and they try to work it out. Well, the younger woman he has the affair with is the one that starts claiming all this witchery stuff because she's upset and trying to get revenge on the community that has scorned her.
Right.
So there's really no witchery going on, and she's lying about the whole thing. So obviously it eventually comes back to John Proctor being convicted of witchery. So now it gets to this point where he has to confess publicly he's had an affair with this girl in order to try to clear his name of this other stuff, which is also damning as well. And so what happens is he gets put in this situation where if he says he did witchery and he signs his name to a public confession to be pinned up on the church door, then he will be spared his life. But that would be the lie. But if he tells the truth and says, I was not committing witchery, they think he would be lying, and thus he would be hung to death because he's lying to the court. So the big climactic moment at the end is his declaration of, what do I have to do? And so he was originally going to say, okay, fine, I'll cry witchery and I'll claim my life again, and I just won't show my face around the community ever again. And then what changes his mind is having to post his name up on the church door, because he realizes his name, John Proctor, is the last good thing that he has. And his speech is, I have 3 children. How can I live my life and raise them the way they need to be raised if I can't even claim my own name? You have taken my life. You have taken everything else. Leave me my name. And they won't do it. And he tears up the confession and he goes to hang to his death. This is one thing I'm a huge proponent of, Adam, and I know you know this about me, is I would rather experience high quality art that has something to say rather than experience something that I think is hollow or shallow and attempts to preach at me through the guise of formulaic labeling. And what I mean is there is a massive difference between watching something like The Crucible and realizing that faith plays a big component in that, but it's a masterful piece of art written by a wonderful playwright. I would rather do that than watch something which is horrible production quality and just preaches at me some really poor, weak, thin-veiled theology and has nothing to do for cinematic history. And then all of these conservative Christians come around me and judge me for not embracing it because I'm supposed to be a believer and an artist, when in fact I'm insulted that something this low quality and has this little imagination to what it is that it's saying and is this judgmental in the way it rigidly frames things out about life, that I don't want any part in it. I would rather say, make me something profound, allow me the liberty of knowing that I am intelligent enough to discuss something and discover something for myself and among the people I experience it with, rather than spoon feed me something shallow and sweet.
I wonder if people, if they're going to commit to go to the theater, or if they're going to commit to whatever, if they've got so much going on in their life, they kind of want to know what they're getting. They're not as eager to embrace things that cause them to spend the next 3 hours thinking about their life and their relationship with God and asking tough questions. They really kind of just want things to come back to them, that they know what they're getting and that they can stop thinking about afterwards. I think we're the poorer for it, but do you think there's something to that?
Yeah, I think that is an astute observation, and I think you're right on the money. There is a place for film, TV, music, and theater to provide a sense of escapism. There's always going to be a large portion of the population that says, I don't go to the movies to think about my life. I go to the movies to escape, or to be entertained. I get that. That's fine. I mean, I love Superman movies. I definitely don't watch Superman movies to get an Oscar caliber experience or to think about my life. I watch Superman movies because I want to watch Superman. I get that. What I'm saying is, in this particular aspect of the conversation, is I would rather go watch Man of Steel, or go watch Dumb and Dumber, or go watch Wayne's World, or go watch something like that, even if it's for pure escapism. I would rather watch something that was just well made for what it is. I just think I would rather, if I'm going to be giving up my time to watch something, I want it to at least be of high production quality.
So what would you suggest to either Christians who are already in places where they're producing, or Christians who are aspiring to be creatives? What would be your plea to them in terms of the art that they create or would create?
That is a great question. I want to read something to you here. I'm going to find it in this book I've got a copy of this book called Performing the Sacred, which is called Performing the Sacred, Theology and Theater and Dialogue. It's written by a seminary pastor and a theater professor, and it's a really good resource. Where's the page?
For me, while you find that, for me, it wasn't a play, but it was a story. The book Silence.
Oh my gosh.
Was not something that just handed to me a nice affirmation with a bow on top, and yet the hard journey of it caused me to be so much more grateful for life and God and things like that, because it was more honest than a lot of Christian fiction that I've ever read. More, I don't know. And so I can absolutely understand your frustration with kind of the, oh, I mixed up the blue paint and the red paint. Johnny still married me, and Jesus gave me a truck, so I understand that frustration. I also sympathize with people where life is so hard. We just need a story to tell us that everything's going to be all right in as simple a way as possible. So, I have sympathy for both sides, but man, that book Silence gave me so much gratitude because the journey was hard and honest and brutal.
And it's a powerful, profound experience. I think there's room for both entertainment and both for profundity. And I just think there's enough high quality out there that we can celebrate the high production quality that artists are crafting, and still find safe options. And we don't have to worry about our faith compromising anything, or our faith being compromised. Here's a quote I want to read to you. Again, Dorothy Sayers is instructive. In 1955, she published an article in World Theater called Playwrights Are Not Evangelists. Dorothy Sayers in it argues forcefully for writers to keep their eyes on their craft, not on a spiritual box office. We should care about spiritual results of our writing, but we need to do so only after first giving attention to writing a good play. This was in 1955. I think this is a perfect summation of everything that I try to encapsulate, and I know other artists of my thinking try to encapsulate, which is if we just focus on giving a good product to the people, then art is supernatural and organic and visceral and emotional enough and subjective enough that there will be good to be had, regardless of whether it was paper thin in entertainment value or profound in discovery. If the value is high quality and the craft that the people creating it has honed is of high quality, then we can trust that there will be something discoverable or enjoyable there so I guess it's more of a process for me. Instead of saying I'm a Christian and Christians don't have enough stuff in the entertainment world because we're being persecuted, which is a big lie and a persecution complex, then I'm going to set out to make more Christian stuff. Instead of doing that, let's just say I have this story inside of me. I want to do it justice by bringing the story to light, and there will be things to be had there because people saw this story.
So would you maybe recommend to Christian artists, rather than trying to proselytize in your work, walk with God on a personal level, fill your life with that relationship, and then do good work, and your walk with God will inform your work without you having to hammer in things that don't belong, that are not part of an organic, honest story?
Yeah, I think that's right on the money.
I think Martin Luther, there's a quote by Martin Luther, something about somebody asked him, how do I please God by making shoes? And he said, you please God by making good shoes. Yeah, you don't please God by etching a little cross into the heel. You please God by making really good shoes.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think God cares most of the time. I don't think God cares if I go see a rated R movie or not. I think he gives absolutely zero cares about that.
You're just down to get off every single conservative list that I have, man. Yeah.
I do think God is more glorified in a conversation that is had because of thought that was sparked by something profound artistically.
Sure.
The very first words we find in the Bible are, in the beginning, God created. I think the strongest window humans have into the very soul of God is that we have been given access into creativity anytime we want, and God is the ultimate artist. Why would we not want it to be high quality? It's not about Christians feeling like we're in a wasteland. It's more about Christians saying, how can we embrace art? And I think one of the biggest things we have a disconnect there is because, especially in our churches, our worship services are so stagnant and so confined to the same ways of doing things that we don't appreciate artistic history. And there's just a lot of stuff ingrained in that. And so I think we're afraid to address the messiness of life and humanity, and we're afraid to address how deep we can actually feel, especially if we ask difficult questions. And for me personally, I relish in that.
Do you think some of that came from maybe even as far back as the Protestant Reformation, where the Catholic Church was steeped in art, but it was steeped in art in such a way that the Protestants did not appreciate or considered idolatry, and so we kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater and began to look suspiciously at art in general? Yeah,
totally. That's certainly one of the key components of why actors were looked at so poorly during that time period. Because if they weren't performing the evangelical mystery plays that churches were putting on for community, but they were still actors, they were considered cast-offs and dirty people.
Do you think that stigma exists today still?
Probably, yeah. There's definitely, it seems stereotypically in conservative evangelical circles, it definitely seems to be an us versus them thing, this overemphasis on in the world, but not of it. I'm not going to listen to Run DMC because that's the devil's music. That's an over stereotype, but like that stuff exists, right? We're like, I'm not going to go see that movie because it's rated R. Like I remember having a youth pastor tell me in church, you know, a normal, good guy. We liked this youth pastor. I didn't really have a problem with it. I remember having a youth pastor give a lesson, and his illustration for the lesson was, I went to go rent a video at the video store back when those existed, RIP. I went to go rent a video at the video store, and 2/3 of those options were PG-13 or rated R. And that just appalled me. And I'm sitting there as a 15-year-old thinking, well, you know what? One of my favorite movies is Last of the Mohicans. Like, come on, man. So like that, I just think there's a lot of programming that is done that is more divisive and more damaging than it is embracive and celebratory. And art and creativity is about releasing human emotion and everything that we have the capacity to feel. And art and creativity instinctively produces community. That's the big component that we're ignoring. This is more of a community aspect than sitting and listening to a sermon for 30 minutes.
What does that look like? Like, what does that look like lived out as a Christian, bringing this art in as a community builder, as a way to find the threads of God through the myths that we've been telling each other for thousands of years? How do you do that? Like what does that look on the ground?
I would say a creative and artistic way that my friend does community just down the street. A friend of mine of 10 plus years does a Monday night potluck. And every Monday night, he invites anybody from the community that wants to come along and just hang out. That is a creative way to do community. Sharing music with another, sharing a movie with another, talking about what moves you, I think is another great way to do it. I have this personal philosophy of I try to create something every day, every single day. I want to create more than I consume. And so I try to create something every day, whether it's very well-worded tweet, or it's something I want to write creatively, or if I want to create a picnic for my wife, or I want to create an opportunity to communicate with someone that I haven't communicated with for a while, or I want to create a way for me to serve somebody. The concept of creativity is ingrained in us, and creativity is a muscle, and it becomes stronger the more you work it out. One of the biggest lies we've chosen to believe is that you're either born creative or you're not. It's a lie. Sure. Everyone can be creative. So I think create more than you consume. Create something every day. And that is inherently artistic. That is inherently intrinsic into our humanity and the way we have been created by the Creator. I think those are some ways that we can explore that. So we've got to change the way we approach our Bible. We've got to change the way we approach our Sunday morning. We've got to approach the way we change our day-to-day from a concept of, do I want to be a negative corrector or a positive inspirer? And how am I creating more than I consume? And how is the community I am cultivating saying it's not about what I achieve, it's about what we feel. It's not about me, it's about us. So I do say, I know I've been talking for a lot uninterrupted right now, and I kind of got hot and bothered. There's one thing I want to read. I love Tom Waits and I love Bob Dylan. I would say Bob Dylan and Tom Waits are saints in my lives. I would qualify them as sainthood. Tom Waits has this famous story that he's told to his kids, that he's told in interviews before. And I think this sums up exactly what I want to be as a father and as someone that approaches faith and art. So this is Tom Waits. My kids are starting to notice that I'm a little different from the other dads. Why don't you have a straight job like everyone else? They asked me the other day. I told them this story. In the forest, there was a crooked tree and a straight tree. Every day, the straight tree would say to the crooked tree, "Look at me. I am tall. I am straight. I am handsome. Look at you. You're all crooked and bent over. No one wants to look at you." And they grew up in the forest together. And then one day, the loggers came. They saw the crooked tree and the straight tree, and they said, "Just cut the straight trees and leave the rest." So the loggers turned all the straight trees into lumber and toothpicks and paper, and the crooked tree is still there, growing stronger and stranger every day.
That's beautiful. You don't have to go very further than your Facebook newsfeed to know that we're currently experiencing a level of division in this country, and I think that's trickling into our churches as well.
Totally.
And you talk about community, and I mean, I think even some of the things that you feel passionately about and the things that you said would be very concerning to people on the conservative side of things. And yet, I imagine that you are very eager also to embrace anybody, not just people who agree with you.
Totally.
That community is built not just with people. I mean, because I think that's one of the struggles that we've gone through. It's just was more on the other side, that communities are built by people who just think like us. So how do people coming from this other side embrace people who are more on the conservative side? How do you build those communities?
Beautiful question. This is where my concept of less Sunday morning comes in. I think Sunday morning has its place, and it's not bad, but it's very polarizing and division creating, because then it becomes about, well, I go to this church where we do this and we believe this. But the problem is people are more passionate about things that they have personally experienced. And if we haven't personally experienced the struggle that someone in the LGBT community or the Muslim community has experienced in our state, or the Black community has experienced in our state, or someone that is below the poverty line has experienced in our community, then we're not going to be passionate about it. And we're only going to look at it as a mere issue or a mere statistic. So
Sure.
I would say the way that we disarm that is by breaking bread around a table and opening your front door.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest thing. Is some of my closest friends and biggest anchors in my life are people that were always going to believe differently than me, more conservatively, and vote differently than me politically. And I'm okay with that, because I think there's a richness to be had in diversity of theology, socioeconomic status, and race. One of the best communities I've ever been a part of was when I went to theater school in Norway, and I was just about the only white Christian there, and everybody else was either atheist, agnostic, or Muslim. And some of those people are my closest friends today. One of my closest friends is a libertarian. I'm a crazy Democrat, but all of these are people that I've sat down with, and I have listened to their stories, and they have listened to mine. It is easier to dehumanize when we keep people as a mere statistic or a mere label. And I feel like church is still operating a lot on these labels, because it's like, well, you can come to church with me. Well, that alienates someone that says they don't believe. Or you can say, you can come to my church, but we don't do instrumental worship, or we're not LGBTQ affirming. Well, then that's going to alienate anybody that wants a guitar or loves gay people to come into your church. Whereas if you say, I have a front door that is open all the time, and I have a dinner table with food, and I like to laugh, I would say that is more where Jesus is discovered and community is created, and we become more active participants in creating more than we consume, rather than just saying, hey, come to church with me. We've got to be able to say, okay, church is about practice, and the performance or the actual game, for lack of a better term, is how am I engaging my community and creating an opportunity to say, I am not dehumanizing, and I am seeing people as they are. And art, I think, is a great connector for that, because art is universal. We all love movies. We all love music. We all feel something when we see visual art. We all feel something when we go and see the theater. Art is a great unifier and is connected to a supernatural aura. I've had people that are agnostic tell me that they don't know what they believe, but you would be stupid if you didn't say that art wasn't a supernatural experience of something. Art brings people together. So I would say, if we want to celebrate community and we want to fuse faith and art together as one from all walks of life, then we've got to realize that what levels the playing field is giving people the space to share their story free of judgment and free of agenda, and connecting through commonalities like we can share art together, or we can create something beautiful together.
And I imagine that's one of the great things that theater can do, is present stories that maybe are not familiar to you. And even if you don't walk away understanding things from the side that is presented in the play, you at least see people more as people rather than an issue.
Exactly. And that's the biggest thing we have to remember, is that we're dealing with people here. I think theater especially, I mean, obviously I'm a little bit biased. I'm a big theater nerd, but theater has the ability of challenging us to go into places of emotion that either we have intentionally unacknowledged or we didn't otherwise know it existed. And you can find that even in comedy too. It's not just in the serious dramas or the classics. You can find it in anything. And so I think it's important for us to be self-aware and to explore those things.
All right, Mitch, I was hoping that you would give anybody who is starting out in theater or looking to start out in theater, do you have any advice for somebody wanting to get into that world and kind of have faith a part of what they do? How would they get started?
Totally. Couple of different avenues here. If you're looking for something to read and you want to explore the idea of fusing art and creativity together, and faith as a walk of life and more of a motivation about what you do, then two books I would suggest reading are The Crowd, the Critic, and the Muse by Michael Gungor. That may be the best book on taking faith and art and fusing them together that I've ever read. So The Crowd, the Critic, and the Muse by Michael Gungor. And then the other one would be Soul Cravings by Erwin McManus, which is basically like a stream of consciousness diary that he wrote about emotion and the depth of the ability to feel, and how he takes that to everything that he does. So
did you read his Artisan Soul?
I did read his Artisan Soul. It was really, really good. I especially appreciated the way he talked about Holy Spirit and how it motivates art, and how those two things are more alike than they're not.
Yeah,
it was good stuff.
I loved how he kind of broke the barriers, what you were talking about at the beginning about the lie that people feel like they're not creative.
Exactly. That was a wonderful barrier breaker for that. So Erwin McManus is a great resource for those two things. Also, I would say immerse yourself in theater that I would say, for lack of a better term, is of the world. Like, listen to the musical Fun Home and be challenged by your paradigms to say, this is not only a beautiful musical and it's well done for high quality, but it also addresses a lot of things that maybe I've ignored before, or listen to the musical Dear Evan Hansen. If you want to get more involved, I'm sure your community probably has a community theater group and they are always looking for volunteers. Go and say, I want this to be a bigger part of my life. How can I be involved? And there will be a myriad of different ways you can get involved, whether it's working with volunteer corralling, working with box office, working with lighting, costuming, set design, acting, directing, ads, anything like that. There's so many different ways you can get involved in those sorts of things. And then I would just say, do something at least once a week that's inherently creative. Like, go on a walk, watch a sunrise, go on a picnic with your loved one, buy the food for someone behind you in line in the drive-thru. Like, just do little things like that and just challenge yourself to say, I want to view the world through a lens of potential and creativity rather than rigidity and rules. And I think you'll find it surprisingly liberating. If you want to look more into the aspects of theater, figure out what you're motivated by. Do you want to write? Do you want to act? Do you want to direct? And pursue those different things. Like, if you want to write, develop an idea and start writing it. Doesn't matter if anyone sees it or not. I firmly believe that the world is a better place when people are embracing their creativity, whether it goes before other people or not. So those are some active things that you can start doing now that don't cost any money, hardly.
One thing that I mentioned on the last podcast that would probably be more appropriate in this one, that in an interview with Liam Neeson, he said that he finds his spirituality and his acting has been connected to the point where he considers when he gives a performance for that to be a prayer. Do you think that that's a helpful way for people to see their creative endeavors as not merely just making something, but there is a spiritual connection and almost even a prayer aspect to when you create?
I think that it's a completely valid and appropriate way of approaching it. And I think it's more common than people may realize. I think that's probably a sense that people carry within themselves, especially artistically, probably more people than don't.
All right, Mitch. Well, we sure do appreciate your time here. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And man, it was good to talk to you.
Right back at you, Adam. I love what you're doing. Keep it up. And thanks for having me.
And you can follow Mitch. Mitch, what's the Starving Critics podcast? Where can people go listen to that?
Yeah, Starving Critics podcast is me and my friend Rachel. We riff on all things cinema. We love movies, and we are a member of the Bedlam Podcast Network. We love being picked up by that awesome network. So you can check out Starving Critics podcast on iTunes or on Spreaker, and also check us out at starvingcritics.com, and you'll find all of our other stuff there. We do some original content. We have Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. So check out starvingcritics.com. Subscribe to our podcast, Starving Critics, on iTunes.
Cool. Anything else to plug?
You know what? I don't think so. Just check out the podcast, and everyone keep creating some cool stuff. We're all the better for it.
All right. Thanks, Mitch. We appreciate it. And thank you for tuning in. And I, once again, have no good closing line. One of these days I'll have a clever catchphrase or whatever. So we bid thee adieu.
Good word.